Hello there, ladies and gents. I'm Andyb, and welcome to another animated show review. And this video's subject of interest has us once again diving into the deep sea of obscure 2000s animation. This is Olliver's Adventures.
Here we go!
Olliver's Adventures is a Canadian animated series created by Edward Kay, a Toronto-based writer and co-creator of Jimmy Two Shoes. Initially, Olliver's Adventures aired on Teletoon as a series of shorts in April 2001. Eventually, it became a proper full show and aired on Teletoon from September 7th, 2002 to March 20th, 2005. The show had a total of 39 episodes spanning over 3 seasons. I watched the show a fair bit when I was a kid. It was never a favorite of mine, but if it came on, I would watch it. And I do remember enjoying it well enough. And so, as I do with many shows from my past, I like to revisit them to see how well they hold up today. And after watching a handful of episodes, I'd say that Olliver's Adventures is terrible. Yeah, I'm serious, it's awful. It's bad, it's like surprisingly bad. Either I had very low standards for cartoons back then, or my brain has been blocking out some very painful memories. Because I couldn't believe how horrendous this show was. Now you may be watching the on-screen footage and confused by my negative reactions. I mean, this show seems like your typical early 2000s Flash cartoon, no cause for alarm. But in spite of its innocent exterior, the show really does suck. And I'm gonna spend some time delving into why it sucks. Prepare for batshit antics as we take a look at Olliver's Adventures. Olliver's Adventures is about a boy named Olliver, who looks like a PG version of Pico from Newgrounds, who goes on wacky misadventures alongside his toy companions, who he brings to life with the use of a special remote control. Now right off the bat, one thing about this show that sticks out to me is its episode format. The two most common formats for serialized cartoons are one 22-minute episode or two 11-minute episodes in a half-hour block. Olliver's Adventures instead uses a 3 shorts format, where every episode is broken up into 3 7-minute shorts. Now this format certainly isn't unique to Olliver's Adventures. Shows like Animaniacs and The Bugs Bunny Show also make use of a 3 shorts format. But this format was definitely more common for cartoons before 2000, so it's unusual to see here. First off, there's Olliver, our main character. And he's pretty much your standard grade school boy protagonist. He loves adventure, he's got an active imagination, and his voice is really irritating.
It was a cold January morning. Can't he see this is an emergency? Something strange was going on, and I had to get over there and help.
What makes this worse is that Olliver also serves as the show's narrator. And that's just great. They gave the whiniest voice in the show the most dialogue.
We had to figure out a rescue plan before the prince got himself a scare-em harem.
What the fuck?
Nah, but it's fine. I mean, I wasn't using these anyway. Alongside Olliver are his toy companions. There's 5 in total, and they're all pretty unremarkable. You've got Jorge, a painfully stereotypical Latino iguana.
Hola, amigo, it's me, Jorge. They got me for attacking the vacuum cleaner in cold blood.
Fucking iguana.
Trog the caveman, who's a caveman. And a bad Johnny Bravo lookalike.
Enough about you, let's talk about me, Johnny Bravo.
Well, enough about me. Let's talk about my jawline.
You stole it!
Tara the cave woman, who has the unique character trait of girl.
I am woman.
Bino the dog, who's just a dog. He's not a mechanical canine or a hose hound. He's not even a talking dog, the most generic kind of special dog. He's just a walking dog. I mean, hey, I've heard of walking the dog before, but I mean, this is ridiculous, you know what I'm saying?
No!
That may be a terrible joke, but this is a terrible character. I feel like it's warranted. And finally, there's Zoomarax the alien. And I'd say he's my favorite of the bunch. But that's really only because I like his name. It sounds like a third-rate allergy medication. Ask your doctor today if taking Zoomarax is right for you. Zoomarax, tell that cold to go fuck itself. But heroes are also defined by the villains they face, and the villains in Olliver's Adventures are also incredibly forgettable. First off, there's Cray, a bald kid who bullies Olliver alongside his group of henchmen known as the Baddies. Yes, that's actually what they're called.
It's Cray and the baddies.
And they're just your generic dumb bully characters that you'd find in any run-of-the-mill kids show. And even then, they're at the bottom of the pack. Half the time, Cray's just laughing obnoxiously, and his 2 henchmen barely have a word, mostly making noises and grunts. Then you have Ollie's older sisters, and they're your typical bossy older sisters. They pretty much serve the same role as Cray and the baddies, to be dim-witted antagonists in whatever episode they're in. And in spite of there being 3 of them, they basically operate as one character. That's right, call in now and get 3 crappy sisters for the price of 1, each with their own distinctive lack of personality. Don't delay, don't wait, change the channel while you still have a chance! Do it, you fool! Then you've got Olliver's teacher, Mrs. Grumpy. And big surprise, she's a typical, run-of-the-mill, crotchety, boring old teacher. Are you beginning to notice a pattern here?
Every single one of them sucks!
Finally, there's Olliver's parents. While they're not exactly antagonistic, their plans and interests usually differ or conflict with that of Olliver's. Aside from being fairly generic suburban parents, their only notable trait is that you never see their faces, only their limbs. And I really don't get why. I think it's supposed to be like the Peanuts, where the adults are never shown and we can't understand what they're saying. But the teacher isn't hidden, and you can see adults in other episodes too. So I don't see why Olliver's parents were given the special treatment of having no faces.
His face.
Overall, the characters are incredibly weak. Whether they be pro or antagonists, these characters are one-dimensional, stereotypical, uninteresting, and just lackluster in every area.
Every single one of them sucks!
Having a bad cast of characters already starts Olliver's adventures on a bad note. But just you watch, cause that bad note is gonna turn into a fucking cacophony. Get comfortable, folks, cause it's all downhill from here. Now this is typically the part of the review where I start listing my problems with the show and give you examples. But I don't think a standard list of cons would do my complaints proper justice. To truly express how disastrous this show is, I'm gonna try something different. I'm gonna take you through the very first episode of Olliver's Adventures, 3 different shorts, and you can experience firsthand the growing confusion and frustration that I felt having to watch them through myself. Think of it like a guided tour through an exploding planet. And if you look to your right, you'll see everything going to shit. Olliver's stuck indoors due to a nasty ice storm. He tries to pass the time playing some game called Synapse Blaster, but a falling tree cuts the power. Oliver decides to find the source of the ice storm, and that's when the plot truly begins. And with that, so do my problems.
I got Zoomerax to hook up his orbital spy satellite. We discovered that a mad weatherman was mad at the world for not watching his forecasts and decided to take revenge by making it winter forever.
Okay, major issue number 1. The show doesn't like to explain itself. You'll often go from scene to scene wondering when or how different things happened. They make these sharp jump cuts and expect you to either fill in the gaps yourself or just not care. Look, I know you don't need to explain everything, and it's a cartoon, there's suspension of disbelief, but Olliver's Adventures treats that suspension like it's life support. They never feel the need to properly establish character or plot details. Take this episode, for example. Olliver summons all of his friends together, and they head towards the North Pole. But Trog and Beano have to sit outside because they were eating bean burritos. We never get to see this, nor is there any evidence to suggest this even happened. Is it really too much to ask for some visuals, instead of just describing things to the audience? I mean, come on, this isn't an audiobook, this is a show! Show me stuff, damn it! If the story you're telling requires you to skim over half the details in order to tell it in a certain amount of time, then I think you need to write a different and shorter story. So Olliver and his friends confront the evil weatherman. He agrees to turn off his ice machine if they can best his team at a game of hockey. And his team happens to be Olliver's bullies, Cray and the baddies. Yeah, they're working together for some reason. Or maybe the bullies are just help for hire. So Olliver accepts the challenge, or at least it's implied he does. It just cuts from one shot of the weatherman to another of Olliver in hockey gear. Again, these jump cuts are abysmal. It's hard to follow what's happening when you keep changing what's happening. I know these shorts are only 7 minutes long, but you don't have to rush everything.
How long will that take?
They said about 7 minutes.
7 minutes? 7 minutes? 7 minutes?
Anyway, Oliver's team is getting swept by the bullies, so they decide to fight back using some pro tactics. My favorite of which being this. It's like 1 minute they're tripping her up, and the next minute they're like, holy shit, she's a girl! It's like puberty just kicked in.
I am woman.
She's a babe!
This hockey game scene is also where my second major issue with this show really comes into play. This time regarding the show's visuals. Now, the character models and locations aren't too bad for early 2000s Flash, but most of the backgrounds are dull and blocky, the animation is really stiff, and the shot composition gets really awkward at times. With this hockey game scene in particular, most of the shots are framed so poorly, you don't even see the puck going into the goal. It's hard to enjoy an action scene when you can't see the action. So Olliver's team wins the hockey game, but the weatherman refuses to turn off the ice machine.
When I made that promise, I had my fingers crossed.
And then, in a poorly framed sequence of shots, the ice machine malfunctions, the weatherman gets covered in snow, and turns into a block of ice. You know, it's like karma, sort of. Olliver turns off the ice machine, but the world is still frozen solid. So what is a boy to do? Apparently this.
I added an extra big splash of hot sauce to Trog and Beano's burrito filling.
Yeah, you remember that line from earlier in the episode that they didn't even show on screen? Well, it was a vital piece of setup for the resolution of this episode.
Because I don't care.
So Olliver fills the ice machine with burrito filling, all the ice is melted away, the mad weatherman becomes a hockey referee, which I will admit isn't a terrible resolution for his character, and everything returns to normal. Well, except for the fact that Olliver forgets to turn off the machine and sets the whole world on fire. And that's the end of the first short, and needless to say, it makes a bad first impression. But hold on, because it gets worse.
Maybe it can get worse.
The next short, Alberta Soario, what the hell is this title? Retains a lot of the same problems from Ice Storm. The animation is rough, the writing is weak, and there's a lot of telling instead of showing. But it does have some unique problems of its own. For instance, there's a lot of drooling, which is really weird and frankly kinda gross. This episode has Olliver and his class going on a school trip to the Dinosaur Museum. But instead of having fun and seeing extreme dinosaurs, crotchety old Mrs. Grumpy makes them watch a boring movie about dinosaur bones. Olliver sneaks out the theater and calls over his good buddy Zoomerax. And then they go get ice cream. Well, I mean, it is a frozen delight.
Zoomerax got licorice because he liked the sound of the word.
Okay, I have to admit, that's kind of adorable. So Zoomerax can't have ice cream. Yeah, having no mouth will do that for you. But despite this, he wants to try a different flavor. So then he does this.
Zoomerax thought it would be easier to transform his phone with his shifter ray. But Zoomerax accidentally turned back the time dial, and it was transforming everything into prehistoric creatures.
Okay, stop. The ice cream gun has a dinosaur setting? A dinosaur setting? Quick tip, if you have a ray gun that can change the flavor of ice cream, do not give it a dinosaur setting. These are two of the most specific and distinct functions from each other. Why pair them together? Who is this meant for? Do you have a fussy triceratops at home who refuses to eat Rocky Road? Well, you're in luck, dipshit, because we've got the product for you. This, right here, is the moment where the show officially lost me. They went too far, they jumped the shark, and flew to the goddamn sun. Now I need to add a new disclaimer to my Zoomerax ad. Warning, Zoomerax may cause involuntary floating, green skin, loss of mouth, and the ability to pull bullshit out of your ass! This rivals the 60s Adam West Batman for most situation-specific weapons.
This calls for the Bat Tweezers.
But at the very least with Batman, it's established that he has a big arsenal of wacky gadgets, and they were all consistently Batman branded. This ice cream dinosaur ray gun scene exemplifies my third major issue with Olliver's adventures. It's stupidly nonsensical. And some people like to call this being creative and imaginative, but I have to disagree. Just because you're messing around with abstract concepts and ideas doesn't mean you should abandon all logic and coherent storytelling. It eliminates the need for interesting problem solving when Olliver and his friends can just bullshit their way out of any situation. Instead of him trying to figure out how to solve a problem with what he has always solves the problem. That's not creative, that's a cop-out. Sure, the specific bullshit may change from episode to episode, but the outcome is always the same. Fucking stupid. To further illustrate my point, I want to compare Olliver's adventures to a very similar property. Calvin and Hobbes, the beloved newspaper comic by Bill Watterson. The premise is very similar to Olliver's adventures. It's about a young boy who goes on wacky misadventures alongside his imaginary best friend Hobbes. Now, aside from the fact that Calvin and Hobbes is more lovable, charming, witty, intelligent, and frankly just better written than Oliver's Adventures, it also has a clear line between fantasy and reality. For example, from Calvin's perspective, Hobbes is a walking, talking tiger who can interact with him and the world around him. But to everybody else, Hobbes is just a stuffed animal. Or when Calvin's being Spaceman Spiff, and in his head, he's blasting away at aliens in outer space. But in reality, he's just spitballing Susie Durkins. The reader is given both perspectives. Calvin and Hobbes effectively expresses childlike wonder and fantasy without compromising its grip on reality. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's appealed to both kids and adults alike. Oliver's Adventures appeals to young kids in the most surface-level way, by bombarding them with fast-moving, flashing colors with very little care for rhyme or reason.
AKA it sucks.
To make a short story even shorter, Zoomerax's ray gun gets eaten by one of the dinosaurs. So Oliver jumps in its mouth and finds himself in the stomach. He grabs the ray gun, blasts himself to freedom, and then proceeds to blast everybody else, returning them to their present-day forms. And this includes Cray and the baddies.
Because I needed to be sure that he'd serve the 3 weeks of detention he got.
Detention for what exactly? Getting stuck in a tree? Being bald and evil? Well, I guess it's like the old saying goes, if you can't make the call, Knievel, don't be bald and evil. And that's the end of the second short. And for my money, it's even worse than the first. In no small part due to that ice cream dinosaur ray gun bullshit. I mean, I'm still not fully over that. But aside from that, the directionless narrative and jerky pacing just make it more difficult to sit through. But don't lose any sleep just yet, because we've still got short number 3.
You think this is bad? This chicanery? He's done worse.
The short begins with Oliver taking a bath.
Mom and Dad made me come in from playing outside and have a bath because... Yuck.
Oh, we're starting on a high note with this one. They really thought that joke was such a knee slapper that they needed to interrupt his sentence just to deliver it. You know, I'm not expecting gut-busting comedy here, but I'm also not expecting brain cell-busting comedy either. Oliver eventually gets out the tub and notices a battleship right outside his window. I swear, there's no build-up, the ship just appears. Also, apparently Oliver can perfectly understand Morse code in raw unfiltered radio waves. Because, you know, the plot demands it. And doesn't Oliver live in a suburban neighborhood? Why the fuck is his house like 6 feet from the ocean? Okay, if I spend any more time on the numerous logic breaks and inconsistencies, we'd be here all day, so let's just move on. The Morse code message is from the people of Sublantis, who are being attacked by a giant sea monster.
They needed help in a hurry, so...
Well, so much for helping in a hurry. Seriously, by the time you show up, I wouldn't be surprised if all the Sublantians were dead. I mean, maybe that's the joke, but with the way the show's written, I don't know if they're being genuine or not. Regardless, this entire sleep scene is pointless. Why not just cut from the bathroom to Oliver heading for Sublantis? The one situation where a big jump cut would be useful, and they decide to take their time. The pacing in this intro is absolute garbage. Oliver then calls Zoomerax, Bino, and Jorge, and once again makes me question the logic of this universe. Because sometimes these characters need to be brought to life, and sometimes they don't. Why introduce the concept of the remote control if half the time it's not even needed? And let me just point out, this is all within the first 2 minutes.
This all happened in the space of a minute!
So Oliver and his friends head for Sublantis, marveling at all the sea creatures passing by.
Including the 3 ugliest fish I'd ever seen in my whole life.
Yeah, that's another thing the show likes to do. Occasionally during his adventures, Oliver comes across characters who bear a striking resemblance to other people he knows. Honestly, I don't hate this as an idea. It's a subtle way of showing how Oliver injects his real life into his adventures. However, this is under the assumption that Oliver's adventures are imaginary. Because if we're supposed to believe that all of Oliver's adventures are really happening to him, then not only are there a bunch of logical errors, but the whole character resemblance thing just adds another layer of confusion. Using this short as an example, why is there a giant sea monster that looks like Cray? Are they related? Does the Cray family bloodline flow to sea creatures? Is this the product of some weird hybrid breeding gone wrong? But again, because the show has a poor distinction between fantasy and reality, it's hard to tell, so you know what, you be the judge. So like 2 weeks later, Oliver finally gets to Sublantis, surprisingly still intact. I guess the octopus was on break. But suddenly their ship gets bombed, and the culprit is none other than Cray and the baddies. Okay, why is Cray here? Where did he get an armed ship? And why is he throwing depth charges into the sea? Did he just know that Olliver was gonna be here? Did the octopus tell him? I have questions, and this show only gives me more questions. Also, we already have a giant octopus attacking the city. I think we have enough conflict for this episode. So how exactly does Olliver get out of this one? Well, he finds some nearby Sublantians, teaches them to blow bubblegum, forcefully using a fish, and they all blow bubbles to tie them to the depth charges and send them back to the surface. And all the while, there's a bootleg version of Mambo No. 5 playing in the background.
You stole it!
So the depth charges rise to the surface, blow up, and kill the bullies. Seriously, we don't see any bodies after this frame. Olliver just sent 3 of his classmates to a tragic undersea grave. This is the guy I'm supposed to be rooting for? But one of the depth charges gets away and explodes to reveal buried treasure.
We only had enough air for a few more minutes. Then we'd have to return to the submarine. I had to choose between taking the treasure or rescuing Sublantis.
Why is this in the episode? This dramatic choice between the treasure and the Sublantians is completely pointless. It comes out of nowhere, it doesn't create tension, it's just a waste of time. How is there this much filler in a 7-minute short? And I think it bears repeating. Giant sea monster, attacking the city. You have a perfectly usable plot point going to waste over here. The entire reason why Olliver even came to Sublantis, and the freaking thing isn't even on screen for a third of the short. Okay, whatever, let's just get to the end. Olliver decides to save the Sublantians and goes after the sea monster. So he calls in dolphin reinforcements to tie up the sea monster with a giant necklace. I think it's implied that the necklace came from the buried treasure pile, but considering Olliver pulled bubblegum out of thin air, what's to say he couldn't pull a giant necklace out of his back pocket? Or perhaps a ray gun that vaporizes sea monsters and makes a killer key lime pie. Sky's the limit when you don't give a shit. So the sea monster is cast into the whirlpool, never to be seen again. And thus, on that day, 2 members of the Cray family were tragically killed at sea. Clearly, Olliver is dead set on wiping this bloodline from the face of the earth. But possible family murder aside, the day is won and the Sublantians are safe. And I guess time works differently in Sublantis, because those few minutes of oxygen clearly don't seem to be a problem when Olliver and his friends are getting thanks. And then we get a confusing jump cut from Olliver heading home in the submarine to Olliver sleeping in his bed and all his friends inanimate once again. So does this imply that it was all a dream, or is this just later that day? Why is this show incapable of having a straightforward narrative? It's like it's allergic to coherency. You know, I thought it was going to be hard to top the ice cream dinosaur gun from the last short, but Saving Sublantis really rose to the occasion by being the worst of the 3 shorts.
Congratulations.
It's awful.
So, with everything I've said so far, are there any positives to Olliver's adventures? For one thing, I kind of like the theme song. It's got some energy to it, and I dig those fast scratch and turntables. And while I have a lot of problems with the final product, I will commend Olliver's Adventures for what it started as. Because if you look at the show's history and development, you'll find out it was actually somewhat of a pioneer in Flash animation. At the time of this show's development, Flash was primarily used for web content, and understandably so. Compared to the costly world of TV broadcasting, you had websites like Newgrounds that gave people a place to host their content for free. Olliver's Adventures was one of the earliest examples of using Flash animation for a TV show. Furthermore, a website was being developed to coincide with the show's launch. Olliver's Adventures was co-developed by Kaleidoscope Digital Productions and Decode Entertainment. In a 2001 interview with Kidscreen, Kaleidoscope president and founder Steve Komu said, "This is an example of true convergence. Because the broadcast animation is being done in Flash, all the art assets can immediately be put online. But instead of putting them online as webisodes or Flash playbacks of what we've seen on TV, we've put a lot of code behind it so that the site is interactive, allowing the children to explore the world that they've seen on TV. I think this was a really smart idea for the time. Being able to reuse assets made things easier from a production standpoint, and for fans of the show, it offered a seamless transition from the TV to the PC. Kids could actually feel like they were having adventures in Olliver's world. In fact, after doing some looking, I was able to find 2 of the website's games on Flash Archive. And to be honest, it really does feel like you're playing through an episode of the show. In fact, I'd say the presentation is better than the show, mainly because the web animation's slower pace makes the animation flow a lot better. As far as the games go, they're fairly typical point-and-click adventures. The key word here being fairly, because they still have the show's batshit sense of logic. Most of these puzzles have nonsensical solutions. Like in one game, you need to get to a nearby island, but your ship has a hole in it and can't sail. So what do? You have Zoomerax turn a can of beans into a boat. And this is the first puzzle in the game. Once you get to the island, you have to get past a giant crayfish. So what do? You throw a hook at it, which turns into a pirate that puts him in a chokehold. You know, if I knew what the hook did beforehand, maybe this wouldn't seem so random. But I don't. So realistically, you just end up selecting everything you have, hoping it's the right item. Like in the other game I found, there's a part where you're in a cave and have to get over a pool of sap. How do you do it? You drink some soda and burp a path. How exactly does that work, and who's gonna guess that? And for one last example, in the following room, there's these singing pillars that annoy you with their song. I had chewing gum in my inventory, and I thought that I could feed it to the pillars to stop them from singing. Well, it turns out you do use the chewing gum to make earplugs. It's like even when I'm right, I'm wrong. But in spite of their nonsense puzzles, the games were pretty well made for the time, and I could see young fans of the show having a lot of fun with them. And not having to hear Olliver's grating narration also made for a more pleasant experience than watching the show. But that's the thing, the website was meant to go along with the show, and the show's lack of popularity is ultimately what killed the website and its games. Come to think of it, the situation is very similar to another show I've reviewed, My Life Me. That show also had ambitious plans in its conception, including the use of mixed media, but failed to see them through due to the show's lack of popularity. Let this be a lesson to you, that a good promotional plan can't save a product that can't find an audience. And that's what makes this story ultimately disappointing. There was clearly some forward thinking and talent involved with Olliver's adventures, but that talent was being used in service of a poorly written show, and no website was going to fix that. If only their efforts could have been applied to a better show, it could have been a different story for Kaleidoscope and Decode. Maybe in a different life, Olliver's Adventures could have been fondly remembered as a pivotal frontrunner for TV Flash animation. But, at least in our reality, all we have is a story of great ideas and wasted potential. And that was Olliver's Adventures, and what a mess it was. At its best, it's generic and mediocre. At its worst, it's a painfully absurd time waster. I've seen and reviewed some bad shows in my time, but even with crap like Kevin Spencer or My Life Me, they demonstrate a basic understanding of story structure. Olliver's Adventures has so many problems on a fundamental writing level that it's one of the most frustrating shows I've seen in recent memory. And maybe some people would say, oh, your expectations are too high, it's a kid's show. It doesn't have to make sense, it's just for kids. Personally, I hate that mentality. That whole, they didn't have to go so hard mentality. Just because a show is for kids and kids have simpler taste shouldn't be an excuse to half-ass and throw random shit together. I think they deserve good entertainment that doesn't treat them like idiots. If anything, the show's erratic storytelling reminds me of when I would write stories in grade school. And maybe if you were playing devil's advocate, you could make the argument that because these episodes are told from the perspective of a young kid, that the show's erratic storytelling is actually fitting and appropriate. But that's when you have to remember that Olliver's Adventures was ultimately written by adults, not kids. Adults whose writing should be of a higher caliber than grade schoolers. Writing in a way that's appealing to kids doesn't require you to match their writing abilities. As I said in the beginning, the show's creator Edward K. went on to co-create Jimmy Two Shoes, a show that I think is pretty fun. So I'd say he's redeemed himself in the world of animation. But as for Olliver's Adventures, I'd say it's a part of his career best left forgotten. And with that, I think I've said my piece. So as per usual, I'm Andyb, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if I make another, I'll see you then. Take it easy.